BBC Radio 4 Extra.
Well, hello, welcome to Cribbins Day here on BBC Radio 4 Extra. We're paying tribute to the late, great Bernard Cribbins on what would have been his 94th birthday, a whole day dedicated to him. This is Wes Butters. I'm popping up between the programmes from different locations that will have relevance, as you'll hear, with a group of people who knew and worked with Bernard. This time, I'm joined by James Hogg, who collaborated on Bernard's book in 2018. Bernard who, 75 years of doing just about everything, which he did. James, welcome to Cribbins Day.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Well, where are we?
We're in the People's Republic of Leeds. We're at the City Varieties in the centre of town, where Bernard spent many a happy evening, more often than not with Barry Cryer performing as part of The Good Old Days, which was, I think most people listening to this will know what The Good Old Days was. Ran for years on TV. They still do it here now. It's not televised, of course, but they still do matinees, etc. And they have, I think the last one was Basil Brush was here. So, but it's variety. It's all about variety. So the TV show ran for donkey's years. I think Leonard Sachs was the chairperson. Introduced all the acts, and I think it's linked with the Players Theatre, which Leonard Sachs was the chairman of that, which was Variety, and that was underneath the arches at Charing Cross Station. So anyway, it's that sort of thing. And the TV show, all the audience used to dress up in Victorian gear, and Bernard and Barry, they did, I think, probably 6, 7, something like, could be more. And they formed a bit of a partnership, and it worked really, really well. It was the only partnership that Bernard was ever sort of involved in, but him and Barry got on very, very well.
I feel like we should have dressed up. We should have been wearing our own Victorian garb, sat here in the City Varieties. So you helped to collaborate on the book. How did that happen? How did that come about?
I was writing the authorised biography of Richard Bryars, and they were great friends. Went back many, many years, and I got in touch with Bernard and asked him for an interview, as you would, and he rang me up, and he gave me a great story about a show they did together called Run for Your Wife. And I said just at the end, kind of just almost like an aside, I said, why haven't you done an autobiography? And he said, oh, don't you start. My wife keeps telling me I should write an autobiography. So I kept badgering him. I just said, look, do it. I'll find a publisher, no problem. I'll help you. Let's do it. And in the end, it took me about a year to persuade him. But in the end, he said, yeah, go on then. Yeah, go on then. He was hard as nails, Bernard. He was a paratrooper, Bernard was, in the late 40s when he was 18 years old. And, he didn't suffer fools. So persuading him to do something he didn't want to do was very hard.
And how did that collaboration work then? What would you do?
The first time I went down to see him, you're always terrified when you begin something like that because you don't know if you're going to get on, etc., etc. So I went down there, and I think Bernard could tell that I was a little bit nervous, and we went to his house, and I went into his living room, and he had a Jackanory chair, a huge high-back Jackanory chair, which is where he sat to watch television. He sat down in that. He said, have you got your little record thing? And I said, yeah. And he said, turn that on. And so he didn't. He said, my name's Bernard Cribbins, and I think you'd like me to tell you a story, wouldn't you? And it's kind of like, that's how he started the interviews like that, with my own sort of private Jackanory, which ran into a period of weeks. Obviously, I kept coming back and forth. I was staying at a bed and breakfast a few miles away, and I'd come back. We only did a few hours a day because it is quite exhausting. He was in his late 80s at the time. And we'd chat away, and then I'd write something, send it to him, we'd go through it. And, if you do a ghost job, it can take 3 weeks. You can write a book, no problem, do the interviews, go away, write it, try and get their voice, and then done. With Bernard, it was much more, it was a collaboration. So it had to be as well. But I wanted it to be like an elongated version, autobiographical Jackanory, really, which is what I think we achieved.
And what were Bernard's memories of being in this very auditorium at the Leeds City Varieties?
Barry Cryer making him laugh, which I know dozens of people, and I was one of them, fortunately, who periodically, some people it would be every week, some people every month. Barry Cryer would ring you up and tell you a joke. And then that would be, you put the phone down. And I was there with Bernard. He used to do it to me occasionally. Bernard quite a lot because they were very old friends. But that was his, the fact that he loved the theatre, he loved the show, he loved the good old days, he loved the atmosphere. But I think the fact that he struck up this this partnership with a really, really good friend that was very, very good. That could have been a regular on TV. I think that's what he loved about this place.
And West Yorkshire generally, he liked West Yorkshire because, of course, well, he did the Railway Children down the road in Oakworth, where we'll be later on.
Yeah, I suppose it's he's a big rugby league fan. So it's that sort of M62 corridor, I suppose. You know, he was born in Oldham, and he used to take the mickey out of me for being from Yorkshire occasionally, and I'd take the mickey out of him, but it was very, very light, if you know what I mean. We were both Northerners, he was a very, very proud Northerner. But yeah, the Railway Children, he was very, very proud of that film, hugely proud, and he was very good friends with Lionel Jeffries, and I think that again, probably one of the reasons why you got that performance out of him, because it's a very, very special performance. All the performances are, but Bernard's fantastic in that. He really, really is. Nobody could ever play that role, and one of his proudest and certainly his most nervous moments ever performing in front of people was when he was asked to sing, I think it was the national anthem, just before the Challenge Cup final in front of 90,000 people at Wembley or wherever, I think it was at Wembley, and he was absolutely terrified. But that meant so much to him, and that was all part of being Northern, really.
And what do you think Bernard would have made of Cribbins Day? All day long, nothing but Bernard Cribbins.
He would have been absolutely delighted, not in a narcissistic way, I promise you. He just found it all very funny, and yeah, at the end of the day, he was an actor, he was a performer, and the fact that he was remembered. I do a little bit on Twitter, and I was his mouthpiece on Twitter. So, you know, some of it was very, very nice. Some of it was, you know, when his wife Jill died about a year ago, just over a year ago, he asked me to announce it because he didn't want to do it through the agent or whatever. So I announced it on Twitter and all. So I was sort of his mouthpiece, and I also used to tell him when there was an outpouring of, you know, I'd sort of like, right, it's Cribbins Day, and me and my mates on Twitter would put a load of stuff about Bernard on there, and then I'd sort of send him the replies and all the messages, and he thought it was absolutely fantastic because I try to explain Twitter to Bernard Cribbins is like me trying to understand infinity. You know, it just doesn't compute. But he just loved that he kind of got the concept a little bit. But just the fact that I just said, look, this is your mouthpiece. This is how you speak to the people who admire you, etc., etc. And he absolutely loved it. So I think he'd be really, really chuffed with this, and he was very proud of his work, his body of work, and so he should have been as well.
This is
BBC Radio 4
Extra.
So it's Wes Butters on Bernard Cribbins Day here on 4 Extra. The comedy historian Robert Ross and me now are at the Actors' Church in Covent Garden in London. Just exactly, though, where are we? Paint the picture.
Yeah, well, it's St Paul's, the church, and it's been a place of worship since the 1630s. So it's an amazing place for actors. And we're actually sat on the bench of Diana Lady Sindon, the wife of Sir Donald Sindon. And it's quite apt because Sir Donald Sindon and Bernard Cribbins worked together in a marvellous Ray Cooney farce called Not Now Darling at the Strand Theatre in the late 1960s. So we're outside the church, and yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful place.
You were friends with Bernard for, 25 years? How did that friendship start?
Because of work, really, because of the carry-ons. I always thank the carry-ons because Bernie did 3 of them, and we were doing conventions together and signing events and whatever, and I was lucky enough to get the job to produce and present the audio commentaries for the DVD box set. So we did his early 2, the 1960s films, Carry On Jack and Carry On Spying, and he was a hoot. I mean, it just, he just doesn't stop talking for 90 minutes, which is a dream for any moderator, as you would know, Wes. It's fun. So from that, and on the second one, Carry On Spying, he just throws away a comment about one of the henchmen, one of the heavies of Dr. Crow, a guy called Jack Taylor. And he said, Rob, I've got his hat, Jack Taylor's hat from this film. I said, oh, wow, why? He said, I'll wear it to do the gardening in. And I said, I'd love that, just a throwaway line. He goes, I'll send it to you. And I think no more about it, And about a week later, this tiny little jiffy bag turns up at the house. And inside it, somehow concertinaed in, is this hat, jumps out, and it's got JT, Jack Taylor, in sort of initials, proper leather, and gold lettering, and then it's got in Bernie's handwriting BC as well, and he's got a little note saying this is the hat that Jack Taylor wore in Carry On Spying, which I have to this day. So I've got a little artifact from that film, and then we just kept on phoning each other and meeting for lunches, and And that was it, really. Just happy memories. I mean, he was the most joyous bloke. He was just there wasn't a malicious bone in his body. He had fond of anecdotes. He'd work with everybody, and being a comedy nut, he'd drop a name in, Terry Thomas or Peter Sellers, or he'd work with everybody, you know. So he was an amazing character and wore it very lightly. He wore his fame with no sort of arrogance at all. He would happily just chat to people in the street if they came up and said hello, which happened quite a lot, or sign a photograph or an autograph or whatever. He just happy man.
What is your favourite anecdote when it comes to Bernard?
Being a massive Doctor Who fan, obviously Bernie was in the second Doctor Who film with Peter Cushing, and we were on the phone for some other job, I think, and he just happened to mention into the conversation that he'd been offered this Doctor Who, like a couple of pages in the Christmas special, Voyage of the Damned. And I said, "You're doing it, right?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "What? You're not going to? You've got to do it. It's the Christmas Day Doctor Who. This is big. You were in the film in '66, and now it's like 40 years on, and well, there were problems at home, and there was flooding around his house, and I said, "Look, come on, Bernie, just for me, please. You've got to do it." And then, of course, from that, he got the role, the Wilf role was extended, and he played it for years and years, and one of his last jobs was to come back, spoiler alert here, for the 2023 60th anniversary show. So he would phone me up, probably breaking all the BBC contracts he'd signed. He would phone me up and say, "Rob, you're going to love next week's episode. I have a bash at a Dalek for the first time since 1966, and he was giving me spoilers all the time. So that was fun. And I'd always phone him. I mean, the thing, I'm sure everybody you've spoken to about him, the light did go out when Jill, his wife, passed away, and he was very stoic, and he was very determined to keep on going. But so I kept in touch with him with phone calls and things, and always phoned on his birthday. So I've got to say, from the nation, that what you're doing and 4Extra are doing, and quite emotional, because I'd always hear his voice on his birthday, and now I'm doing the same thing. His first birthday without him being here, so that's a lovely thing. And he was so important to not just the BBC, but entertainment in general, that it's a lovely tribute. So thank you. It's worth the licence fee on its own.
Well, what a good job he did break those rules and tell you about Doctor Who. Otherwise, without you saying, "Yeah, you must do it," he might never have done it.
Well, I take that as a small benefit. I got no commission, but no, it was, and again, because I remember we went to see David Tennant in Hamlet. That would have been just before Bernie's 80th, so 2008, wasn't it? The generational appeal of Bernard Cribbins was amazing, because there were kids in the audience there because Hamlet was Doctor Who, basically, or Doctor Who was Hamlet. And to see Bernard Cribbins walk in, there were kids like amazed and running up and asking for autographs from him. And he was so sweet, because I think David had put him like in the first row or second row or something. And there was some little girl who was miles back who had come up to get an autograph. And he said, "Where are you sitting, dear?" And she, "Oh, I'm right up there, He goes, "Do you want to swap seats? How many people are you with your daddy? Just your daddy?" "Oh, yeah." He goes, "Oh, well, him and Jill were sat there. Do you want to swap?" And he swapped with this kid. Beautiful man. Just for the rest of her days, that girl was saying, "Wilf Moffat gave me up his," it's beautiful. So yeah, he was a true gentleman and gentleman. So that was a lovely memory too. See, there's loads. You've pressed my buttons now, Wes, and I'm spurting out memories left, right, and centre here.
BBC Radio 4 Extra.
It's Cribbins Day on 4Extra. I'm Wes Butters, and there was mention in that programme of the Oldham Coliseum, which is where I am now with the artistic director, Chris Lawson. Chris, thank you for being part of Cribbins Day. It was suggested in there that Bernard started out here, mid-1940s?
Yeah, Bernard started at the Coliseum when he was 13. He came with his school, and there are a number of schools that came from across the borough, and it was actually something called Warship Week, where the theatre was raising money for a warship during the war. And he was part of a performance there and was spotted by the theatre's Douglas Emery. His job was resident producer at the time. And Douglas Emery approached the parents of Bernard and asked if he would and could join the Coliseum, and originally kind of play the younger male roles in performance. So that might be like a grocer's boy. It might have just been a few lines. And then when he left school at 14, he kind of continued his relationship and also was the ASM, so he was doing backstage roles. And then in the rep it'd kind of be a different performance, perhaps every week. He was noted as doing like 70-hour weeks, which now in a working week of 39, 40 hours is kind of unthinkable, really. And so he would be backstage and on stage, kind of doing everything, really, which I think is sort of reflective of his career going forward, that he'd be able to cover so many different types of role.
What do you know of his early life in Oldham?
Well, we knew that he kind of lived and grew up in Glodick and Durker, and his parents weren't necessarily overly kind of into professional theatre, but his dad was connected to Amdram and his mum was a weaver in the town. So a very kind of traditional, I think, upbringing of Oldham at that time.
And he says in the second part of that programme that he once played Stanley in A Streetcar Named Desire.
Yeah, so he did a number of different roles, and I guess just as a play and as a role for most actors, it is a defining moment. So to be playing that role at the Coliseum, and then alongside that in kind of comedies and different dramas as well. But I think that's been noted for us in our history as a standout because of how famous the play is. I
found an interview where Bernard had said on the first night he took his T-shirt off, wiped himself down with it, and a man in the front row was sick.
Yeah, I mean, at the Coliseum you are fairly close to the stage, so I can imagine that was an experience, and also probably a reflection of the work that the role required.
You're the artistic director at the Oldham Coliseum, but as an actor, how would you describe Bernard Cribbins?
I think he was kind of representative of rep theatre of the time, which are kind of highly professional, highly skilled, and able to cover so many different types of roles and different types of theatre. Someone that a national treasure because of that, really. His ability to shift and change and make people laugh and also hit the drama in the roles that we've talked about when required. So for me, everything that an actor should be.
I mean, he had so many careers. It's really difficult to sum Bernard up.
Yeah, absolutely. Even in his early days, like age 13 and 14, being an ASM and having an understanding of backstage. I think that's quite telling of the kind of rep model of theatre that was so common and popular for so long. Because as an actor, you're required to play so many different roles, but also his work as an ASM and his work backstage. In that way, you're having an understanding of different processes of creating a character and delivering a role, but also you're seeing how every aspect of being a performer and offstage works. And I think that's what made him have such a kind of depth and breadth of performance.
And again in that programme, Matthew Sweet says something that I think is a great observation, that Bernard worked his way into all our lives, that he feels like a family member. I think that's true, isn't it?
I think so, and I think his connection to Oldham and the Coliseum particularly, and just as a performer where you say the name and it kind of just connects to positivity, really, and whether you knew Bernard or not, a kind of friend. And I think that's how the theatre always saw him when he was here, when he was younger, and then post-war as well.
This is BBC Radio 4
Extra.
If you have just turned on, you're listening to Cribbins Day here on 4 Extra. Wes Butters with you, and now we're going to hear Bernard talk about Jackanory in this next part of Bernard Who, the 2013 two-part programme in which he looked back over his professional life with the producer Martin Jenkins. I'm here at the home of the producer Angela Beeching, who did so many editions of Jackanory. In fact, Angela, I think I'm right in saying he appeared in the most.
Yes, 114 episodes. There was quite a rivalry between him and Kenneth Williams because he did a lot as well. Bernard always used to ring me up and say, has Kenneth done any more? I need to come and do some more and all that. I don't think Kenneth minded at all. I'm sure he didn't count how many Jackanories he did, but Bernard was very keen to know how many he'd done. And please, could I do some more? And of course, he was wonderful at it, from going from things like The Wind in the Willows to Alice in Wonderland and then to comedy stories. And the particular thing that we did was the Mortimer and Arabelle stories, which were written by Joan Aiken, who had written The Wolves of Willoughby Chase and that whole series of books about Dido Twite. But one day there landed on my desk this completely balmy story about Arabelle and her pet raven, and the raven had been found in her father's taxi, and he brought it home, and there came all these stories. And they arrived on my desk. I asked Bernard to do them for Jackanory, and he did. And then another one would come, unsolicited. I never asked her for them. And every year, and then he'd say, has she written another one? Has she written another one? And so every year, when I look at the list of things he did, there was another one and another one and another one.
But in total, 114 episodes of Jackanory, and he started out in December 1965. Now, oh, you're saying 66. Why do you say that? He says 65 in his book.
I say 66 because I have the Jackanory Bible, and every story that ever's been done, and every writer and every programme number is there, and it starts in 1966, December 1966.
So describe the Bible that you have in your hands. This is an original Bible, is it?
This is the original Bible. It's a very grotty piece of A4 sheets, all different colours according to the year, and starts at the back with the pink sheet, which is 1966, with the very first Jackanory programme.
I mean, just to flick through, and Bernard's name, I can see straight away. Richard Bryars here. We have Tony Robinson, Rick Mail, Victoria Wood, Spike Milligan, Judi Dench. There's Kenneth Williams, Jeremy Irons, and the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, as was. What was Bernard's appeal, do you think, with children?
He had that knack of being able to look at the camera, and it's not an easy thing to do when you're doing a story, and reading autocue as well. And some people actually can't do it. It's different if you're reading the news and all that sort of thing, of course. But if you're actually reading a story and you're trying to convey that you are reading it, not everybody can do that. It's quite a difficult thing to do. And he just had the knack of being able to do it, being able to convey all the voices, the humour, or a serious piece. And he was just brilliant at doing it. There were quite a few other people who were, really good at doing it too. But the reason that we used him so many times on so many stories was because he was brilliant, and the way that he told them, which is the most important thing. And he was a joy to work with.
Do you remember the first time working with him?
I do remember the first time. We were doing a week of stories about pantomimes, and we did it with little sort of paper puppets, Pollock's Theatres. And we were all taking part in it too, wielding these little things. And Bernard was telling the stories, and we were shuffling these characters across the stage. It was very, very funny. We were all in fits of laughter. I dread to think what it looked like. That was way back in the 60s, one of the first things.
Why did he like doing them?
I don't think it was that he was desperate to have all that screen time to himself, but he just enjoyed doing it, I think. And as I said, he used to ring me up and say, I haven't done a Jackanory for ages. What's going on? Is there another one? And has Joan written another story for me and all that? He just loved doing it, I think. And that's why he came across so well, because he wasn't nervous. He just enjoyed doing it. And there were times when I looked at the list of the stories that he did on Jackanory, and there were gaps, and I thought, what was he doing then? Well, of course, he was off doing something else, like filming the Railway Children or doing the Wombles or whatever. So, I mean, he never stopped. He must have enjoyed it, otherwise he wouldn't have done it so much, would he?
This is
BBC Radio 4
Extra.
Yeah, today has been Cribbins Day all day long on what would have been Bernard Cribbins' 94th birthday. It's Wes Butters. He started off 80 years ago right here at the Oldham Coliseum. Chris Lawson is the artistic director. And I think I'm right in saying, Chris, that Bernard didn't actually come from a theatrical family at all. So where did his love of theatre come from?
Well, we know that when Bernard was 13, he came to the Coliseum with his school, which is very similar to now when we do things like Panto and young people come on their first trips. So he'll have seen the stage, seen performances and performed himself. So perhaps there. We know that his mother was a weaver in Oldham, as many people were at the time. But his dad was connected to amateur dramatics. So perhaps where an interest and love came from. Also, like a lot of people, maybe he was encouraged and had that natural talent that we all saw later on.
And he'd performed in quite a few things while still at school, but then when he left, he'd been given the job of assistant stage manager at, 14?
Yeah, so he was kind of spotted, I guess, when he was at school, and then he kind of started working here as part of the rep company, and he was an ASM. So as an assistant stage manager, he was backstage dealing with props and the kind of offstage aspects of theatre, whilst also performing roles that would change every week. And he left to do his national service and then came back after that, which is where he really kind of started to take perhaps leading roles and was doing everything from hard-hitting dramas, Shakespeare, to even panto. When he was 18, he was in what we think was the first, or certainly one of the first, Coliseum pantos, where he was in Aladdin.
And his accent, let's talk about the Oldham accent that must have been softened, because it's quite strong, isn't it, usually?
Yeah, I think until recently, really, that was the kind of way it was for people with regional accents, and they weren't necessarily heard on stage or, again, more recently on television. And if you went through a kind of formal training, it was sometimes encouraged to be softened, and I think that will have been the same for Bernard, with kind of RP or a softer accent being encouraged. The reasoning at the time perhaps was for clarity or maybe a kind of uniformity of language on the stage, and it's something we don't see in the same way now. But even myself, when I was at drama school, kind of 12, 15 years ago, voice classes, it was often softened.
We spoke before about his acting ability, and his range was quite something. There's always that feeling of the comedy actor who wants to do Shakespeare, to be taken seriously. But I felt always with Bernard that he embraced everything, all of it. He wasn't precious about one thing.
I think it's testament to him that possibly it's because of the fact that he could do all sorts, and I think that's a real test as an actor, especially someone working in rep, when what is required of you weekly is a totally different character. And so to not be precious, I think he perhaps saw the opportunity there to work more, and as an actor to give more to audiences and connect to audiences. And quite often you can do pantomime or you can do Shakespeare, and they bring sometimes the same challenges and sometimes different. So for him to be able to cover such a range is why I think people kind of fell in love with him as an actor, because he could speak to them in so many different ways.
Now, do you have a theatre ghost at the Oldham Coliseum?
We do have a theatre ghost. We have Harold Norman, and Bernard was actually in the Scottish play with Harold. Harold was on stage with another actor called Anthony doing a famous fight scene, which I think is Act 2, Scene 3, and there's a sword fight. Bernard would have been most likely in the wings, kind of observing this. And in contemporary theatre, you use kind of prop swords. They're not real swords, but at the time they would have been using real swords, and they would have been heavy and sharp. And the fight scene took place with Bernard in the wings, and Harold was actually stabbed 4 inches into the stomach and crawled off stage. The curtain eventually came down, and the audience thought that it was all part of what was happening, and kind of applauded and shouted and asked for Harold Norman to come back on stage to take a bow. And the theatre staff at the time realised that it was real and it was serious, and there was plenty of blood. It was absolutely an accident, and unfortunately Harold, due to complications after operations, did pass away from a sword fight on stage, which Bernard Cribbins would have been there for.
This is BBC Radio 4 Extra.
Hello, I'm Richard Ashworth, the station master at Oakworth Railway Station, famous for the Railway Children film, and you're listening to Cribbins Day on BBC Radio 4 Extra.
Richard, talk me through what we have. We have a treasure trove of Railway Children memorabilia.
Well, we've got probably the most important piece is an original film poster for the Railway Children from 1970, and scattered around the edge of it there are a number of signatures, autographs, little messages.
And where's Bernard? Let's see where he's signed. I can see Dinah Sheridan. I can see... whose name is that? Jim. Who played Jim?
Chris Whitty.
Chris Whitty? Not the Chris Whitty, though, surely.
A Chris Whitty, certainly, yes.
Sally Thompson, of course.
Jenny Agatha.
Jenny Agatha is there. Where is Bernard? Did he sign it, do we know?
He might not have done, after all this.
After all these years, you've thought Bernard signed this poster. He didn't actually sign it.
No, it doesn't look like it, does it?
But we do have, so this is nice. You have a tribute to Bernard that presumably you'd put up after he passed away in July.
Yes, that's right. It just felt as though we should do something, really, because the significance that the film had on the Worth Valley Railway and Oakworth Station in particular, it can't be overstated. And, Bernard had a huge role in that film. It's largely down to him that it's such a popular film, I think.
What else do we have? We have photographs here as well.
That's right. We've got some photographs here from sort of behind the scenes, I suppose you'd call them, from the film. We've got a nice picture from the actual film of Bernard as Albert Perks having a look at Peter's steam engine, which is kind of the first way that the children get to be friends with Perks when Peter's steam engine explodes and he goes down to the station to see if Perks can fix it. We've got a nice publicity shot of Bernard and the three children down in Oakworth Goods Yard. And then here we've got a nice kind of relaxed shot of Bernard and the children again. Bernard looking quite dapper, I suppose you would call it, in his cowboy hat. It was a very hot summer when they were filming, and Bernard took to wearing this cowboy hat, straw hat. So he features in quite a lot of the behind-the-scenes photographs wearing that cowboy hat, sitting in his collapsible chair.
Yeah, he's sat there in his director's chair with Bernard Cribbins on it. I mean, these are great photographs. I mean, I'm guessing a lot of the people in the picture as well were locals, because a lot of the locals were dragged into filming, weren't they?
They were, yeah. A lot of the locals came down. The person in this that you probably wouldn't be able to recognise is Anne Cryer, and her husband Bob Cryer was instrumental in getting the railway preserved. He was an MP, and Anne later on she became an MP as well, and she's still the president of the Worth Valley Railway. So she had a role with her children on the platform. You can see them in the film itself.
And when they come to Oakworth, when people come from all over the world to see it, are they surprised how much you've preserved it, how much it looks like the Oakworth station in the film? Yes, people are constantly surprised. We keep it around about 1905, 1910, which is roughly when the film was set, and we're able to do that because the station was always gaslit, so we keep it gaslit. Still, we don't have electric lights here or anything like that, and we can keep it at that era. It's what people expect in some ways, but also delighted when they do turn up, and it still does look pretty much like it did in 1970. And we can see the levers outside that Perks had to pull and run around. That's right. His cottage is just next to the level crossing. You can see the space where he had a vegetable plot under the signal. I mean, feel free to run down the platform and shout, "Daddy, my daddy," if that's what you want to do. Yes, we get people doing that, and we get people who get quite emotional. The film has a really special place in people's hearts, and people do get quite emotional actually visiting Oakworth Station. A few Network Rail employees on the line. They're working on a train or doing something. Would they react, do you think, to my "Daddy, my daddy"? It's all right. They're all volunteers. It's just that some of them do work for Network Rail as well. But this is their days off. So although they spend their time involved in track maintenance on the rail network, when they have a day off, they come here and do the track maintenance on our line as well. So I'm sure they wouldn't mind. They're probably used to it. If you'd rather, you could shout Oakworth Station, which is what Mr. Perks. I don't know which I'd rather do. Oakworth Station. Daddy, my daddy. And just on cue there, somebody walks past. I've gone bright red. Richard Ashworth, thank you so much for having me here today at Oakworth Railway Station. You're very welcome. It's been lovely to meet you.
This is BBC Radio 4 Extra.
All day today on 4 Extra, we've been paying tribute to the late, great Bernard Cribbins on what would have been his 94th birthday. I'm Wes Butters. Thank you for listening. I'm back with Angela Beeching now, Jackanory producer, because he did so many episodes of Jackanory. Just remind us, Angela, how many?
114. Yes, he really loved the fact that he had done more than anybody else. And the interesting thing is that a lot of people, actors and actresses, were clamouring to do Jackanory as well, and were probably incredibly jealous that Bernard did so many.
The Jones family were travelling in a caravan in Ireland on their way to see great Aunt Rosie Ryan. On Blackfeagle's Bog, they rescued a man trapped in the mud, who turned out to be Mr. Plunkett, a local factory owner.
The Mortimer and Arabelle programmes that he did, the stories that he did, which were written really not originally for him, but once he'd done the first one, then I think Joan Aiken wrote them with him in mind because he did the first one, so she carried on writing them. And he was just brilliant at them, and I love the stories because they're so quirky. And Quentin Blake did the most wonderful illustrations for them. And so between them, Bernard and Joan Aiken and Quentin, it was just a dream made in heaven, really. He did James and the Giant Peach, The Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass, the 1000th programme, the 3000th programme, Jubilee Week, which was for the Queen's Silver Jubilee. When in the Willows he did.
And we know all this because we have the Jackanory Bible, which is that the only copy?
No, probably not. I don't know. Other people may have a copy, but this is my only copy, and it's, as you see, it is the original.
It's dog-eared.
It's very dog-eared, yes.
I read James and the Giant Peach on Jackanory in 1968. Jackanory was only 3 then. It's 30 now. This is its 30th anniversary year, and we are celebrating. I'm here because I've done more Jackanories than any other actor, and we're looking at Roald Dahl on Jackanory because we've done more books by Dahl than by any other author.
For the 25th anniversary of Jackanory, we held a big party. It was a very, very snowy night, and everybody came in black tie. It was quite a posh do, and Bernard was the guest of honour, and we gave him a little silver box, I think it was, in the shape of a book. And, of course, he fooled about and did all sorts of things, but it was lovely to see so many people, everybody who had been on Jackanory, the famous people who had all turned up, and illustrators as well, because we used a lot of illustrators, and other people who were involved in the programme.
And you have photographs here of Bernard from that time. There's you, and there's him.
Yes, Bernard making a fool of me, of course, and holding up his little box and a lovely illustration of him, and also a beautiful cake that we had made specially for the occasion, and lovely photographs of everybody who was there.
And then, of course, he went on to win the BAFTA Award, Lifetime Achievement Award, and, of course, receive an OBE.
Yes, and quite rightly so. I think it was well-deserved, and I believe he won other awards too. I think he was awarded the J.M. Barrie Award, which was to do with children's programmes and children's literature and so on. So quite right too.
The legacy that he leaves, how would you sum that up?
Well, huge. I mean, look at how many times The Railway Children is shown on television, and all his other programmes, and all the programmes that we've done are all in the archives, so they're there for anybody to see. And, who could have a better legacy than that?
BBC Radio 4 Extra.
It is Cribbins Day here on 4 Extra. All day today, nothing but Bernard Cribbins programmes on what would have been his 94th birthday. I'm Wes Butters, back at the Leeds City Varieties in West Yorkshire with James Hogg, who collaborated with Bernard on his book, Bernard Who, 75 years of doing just about everything. James, just remind us how the collaboration worked.
It was hard work. He was, be round at 9 o'clock. Make sure you bring me lunch, me and Jill lunch, which I always did. And if he didn't like something, he would tell you. But he shot from the hip, Bernard. So sometimes, like when I sent him the full manuscript for the first time, he rang me up and he just said, "It's dreadful. I can't. This is awful. Absolutely awful. This isn't right." I said, "What page are you up to, Bernard?" He said, "I'm up to page 3, and it isn't right. It isn't right." I said, "Right, do me a favour, read it all the way through, then ring me back and we'll go through it." And he rang me out after about, I'm at page 150. Actually, it's not too bad. I think Jill's read it. She loves it. So yeah, okay, fair enough. So, but he really shot from the hip. He didn't, there was no sort of, I'll tell you, if I don't like something, I will tell you right now. But hugely enjoyable. And I do a bit of fishing. Bernard was a very, very keen fisherman. And, well, shortly before he died, we used to speak a couple of times a week, and he would ring me up. I'd be in France or somewhere fishing. What are you catching? And he couldn't do it anymore. And he lived his sort of life as a fisherman through me a little bit, and which was very, very nice. But he was a great friend. There aren't many people. I've done 30 of these sorts of books, either biographies or collaborations. There are very, very few people I actually, befriend because it's a job of work at the end of the day. But Bernard's one of the very few, and I'm very, very glad we did.
And just paint the picture of what we can see, where we are right now on Cribbins Day.
Well, it's a beautiful, I think 400-seat Victorian, I think early Victorian theatre in the centre of Leeds. It's well hidden. It's off the beaten path, so to speak. But it's absolutely stunning. I've seen so many people here. Fortunately, I did see Barry Cryer here. He came back and did a stand-up a few years ago to celebrate his, I think, 850th anniversary or something because Barry was a Leeds boy. And I've seen everybody here from John Shuttleworth, Steele Span, Arthur Smith. I've seen so many people here. It's great. Unfortunately, never saw Bernard, but it's a beautiful theatre. It's one of the oldest surviving music halls in the country. And if you haven't been, seriously, I would urge anybody with an interest in live entertainment and this sort of thing to pay a visit.
Now, we heard in that programme, Bernard Cribbins Comedy Classics, that he appeared in 3 carry-on films. I think a lot of people think it's more, but he only appeared in 3. There was Jack, there was Spying, and then there was Columbus. We won't mention that. But which was his favourite?
It was Jack. I think a lot of people assume it was Spying because that's probably the more popular of the 3, certainly more popular than Columbus. But he loved Spying because that's really where he got to know Barbara Windsor, who became a really, really good friend of his. They were very, very close, great chums. And but no, he loved Jack. He thought Jack was great fun to make. He had a good role in it, and he was sort of the lead, as opposed to in Spying, it's a bit more of an ensemble thing. But he was the male lead, and he got to work with Juliet Mills. What's not to like? But it's a slightly less raucous film. So I doubt that's probably one of the reasons why it isn't as popular. But it looked really, really nice. It was they probably stole lots of sets from other films, etc. So it looks good. It's in colour. But no, he's very proud of that one.
Did he ever say about doing more carry-on films? Was there a reason why he didn't do more?
I don't think so. He wasn't a natural male lead, though, if you know what I mean. So I'm not sure actually, because he would have fitted into that sort of ensemble, and he did the films with Peter Sellers, etc. Where I know that Sellers was the lead, but they were all, it was him, David Lodge, etc. It was that kind of ensemble feel where you had this sort of like team of 4 or 5 absolutely high end top talent there. That were all vying for attention, but I don't think I'm pretty sure it wasn't anything to do with money. Which a lot of them say, it was, because he was working. He never stopped working. But also, I don't think, if memory serves, I'm pretty sure that he didn't want to get sort of pigeonholed, become known as a carry-on, because he was known as for doing carry-on films. He only did 3, but he wasn't known as a carry-on actor. Really, he was known far more for the Wombles and the Railway Children, and even Fawlty Towers. Bizarrely enough, bearing in mind he was only in 1 episode. But he's probably known more for Fawlty Towers than he is the carry-on films. So yeah, I'd say that. I'd say he probably didn't want to get typecast.
And, of course, and you mentioned it there, Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy in, I think, about 1972 in London.
He absolutely loved that, and it's a great film. Got on well with Barry Foster, who was a considerable actor as well, good friend of his, and they were all quite nervous about working with Hitchcock. But then they realised quite quickly that what he found most fascinating about it was that he kind of directed on trust, because he was not very mobile at the time, and the team of people he had around him had been working with him for a long time, assistant director, etc., etc. And so he would basically just sit there, and even if he couldn't see what was going on, he'd trust, he'd sort of like direct from his chair and in his mind and say, this is what you need to do. Okay, Alfred, no, or whatever they called him, probably Your Majesty or something, and he did, and he found that absolutely fascinating. So he loved it, and he also played a I was going to say a bar steward, a swine. He also played a baddie, which he didn't often get to do. Not a baddie per se, but he was a bit of a nasty character. He wasn't very nice, and it was a break from the old routine, and it didn't look bad on the CV, did it? Sort of Hitchcock. In the sort of, I'm not saying the twilight of his career, it certainly wasn't, but he was sort of late middle age at the time, and it was excellent. So, and it's I think it was always a little bit to later Hitchcock, but a lot of people talk about it very, very warmly now. I think it's a fantastic film.
Yeah, I do. I think it's great. I love his mention as well of our favourites on 4 Extra, the Goons. Peter Sellers, you mentioned a moment ago. Memories of Peter Sellers.
Peter Sellers, it was all from 2A stretch days. It was all about Peter Sellers picking him up from Waterloo Station. He was living, I think they were already in Weybridge, and he would get the train up to Weybridge, or he'd have his bicycle with him, and Sellers would pick him up in his Rolls Royce. And then there'd be people screaming and running by the Rolls Royce. It was all sort of that kind of thing. But he was in awe of Sellers, very, very much so. And I think it was in Wrong Arm of the Law. They had to do a very close-up shot in the back of a car. And Bernard said at the end of the take, he said, I was very, very disappointed in Peter's performance because he said he didn't move. He barely moved. And he said it was a bit strange. He said he wasn't really putting much into it. And then he said, I saw the rushes later on, and he just said it was absolutely forensic. He was doing everything perfectly. But because it was a close-up shot, it was very much more, it was more slight, etc. As I said, it was... you didn't have to exaggerate anything, and he just said that his technique was unbelievable even then, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. So he probably learnt more from Peter Sellers. I think he definitely did learn more from Peter Sellers than anybody else, certainly in those early years. But film acting, I mean, Peter Sellers hadn't done a great deal of film acting by then, had he? In the early 60s, not a great deal, but yeah, he said that he was every time he just surprised him. He was incredible.
There'll be a lot of Doctor Who fans, I'm sure, listening to Cribbins Day on 4 Extra and want to hear us talk about Doctor Who.
He didn't do a great deal of science fiction. He did some fantasy things like She, etc. Mouse on the Moon, which was kind of a comedy sci-fi thing with Ron Moody. But then he got together with Cushing and did one of the 2 Doctor Who films. I can't remember if that was shortly before or after She, but he loved working with Cushing. He was a huge Cushing fan. And I know that, if you see the lineup of Doctors, Cushing isn't there. I'm not a massive Doctor Who fan, so I don't actually know why, but he's not. But when they talk about Bernard being a companion with Doctor Who, which I think he was with David Tennant, he was also a companion. I think he was one of the first to be a companion twice with 2 different Doctors, etc. But he loved Doctor Who. He absolutely loved it. It was, it came at towards the end of his career, and he had 2 things. Old Jack's Boat, which he did, which was the kids thing. That was set up in Staithes, where he'd sort of tell stories. He was an old fisherman, which was great fun. But Doctor Who was just, it introduced him to a totally new audience. And he made some great friends, people like David Tennant, Catherine Tate. Had a lot of fun doing it. I think when he passed away, that was when I was sort of like looking on Twitter, etc. Everybody mentioned the Railway Children, the Wombles, and stuff like that. But Doctor Who was the thing. It was all Wilf, absolutely everywhere. So he really touched. He touched a few hearts playing that particular, and it was sublimely written. It really, really was. So he was in very, very good company. He had good support, but he really, really enjoyed it. And he'd managed to do a couple of scenes just before he died. It was the last thing he ever did, which I think is probably quite fitting, with the fact that he was in something that had basically given him a lift towards the end of his career. But no, he thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a nice way to end.
We finally see that next November as part of the Doctor Who 60th anniversary. So that's something to look forward to. But we, as you say, we've reached the end, and Bernard passed away in July.
It's not a very nice ending, unfortunately. When Jill died, so I think it was October last year, so October 21, the stoic, I can get through anything, para Bernard, kind of wilted, disappeared quite quickly, and he was lost without her. They were married since 1955. Incredible. You won't find many marriages in show business or anywhere that have endured as long. And they were so close. I remember having a discussion with him about why they didn't have children one day, and they couldn't have children. He didn't go into detail, but you could tell it really upset both of them. It was something that they'd have been fantastic parents, without any shadow of doubt. And I think the whole children's TV stuff, I think that was almost him sort of living his parenthood, and Jill to a certain extent as well, because she was always with him. But when she died, he kind of, I remember putting the announcement out, and I sent him all the best wishes, all the well wishes, that the messages that people had sent me on Twitter, etc. And I suppose it was at the beginning of the year he just sort of started to peter away, really. And then he had a fall. He went into hospital, and I spoke to him, I think, once when he came out. And then I kept on trying to ring him, it just everything went to voicemail. And I spoke to his best friend Paul Hawkyard, and he said he'd gone into Denville Hall for respite. You'll only be there for a couple of weeks, and then he went back into hospital, and which is where he died, unfortunately. So it happened. It sounds horrible, mercifully quick, in the sense that I think Paul has said that he knew the writing was sort of on the wall, if you know what I mean. But it was, let's say he died of a broken heart or anything, but, his other half, his everything had been taken away from him. He loved what he did for a living, and he had so many friends. He was very gregarious and, very wonderfully social human being. But Jill was his life, very, very much so. And, together since I remember writing about their wedding. He wouldn't stop talking. It was wonderful. It really, really was. Because he'd worked for Watney's, the brewers, before they got married, and he'd made friends with one of the dray horses. And as they came out of the registry office, and it was Chelsea, he said there was a horse parked up just down the road, and it was the same horse. And it was just one of those stories, and Jill was sitting there, and they were both beaming, and they'd had a wonderful, and she was a fisherwoman as well. She loved fishing. They did everything together. They ran golf days together. They had such a special relationship. So although nobody wanted to see Bernard go, nobody wanted to see Bernard unhappy and without Jill. So the fact that when it started to happen, it happened quite quickly is a blessing, definitely.
And as we've heard throughout Cribbins Day on 4Extra, there is such a vast wealth of material, of jobs, of performances, of work that Bernard had done over the years. What do you think his legacy is?
Well, he was a workaholic, and he would do anything. He told me a wonderful story about Roy Kinnear once. He was walking up Charing Cross Road, and it's the only time he ever met him. He said, "Hello, Roy," and he said, "Oh, how are you working?" He said, "Well, he said, do you know what really makes me special as an actor?" He said, "What's that?" He said, "My availability." And he said it was one of his favourite stories because it kind of rang true with what Bernard was all about. He didn't want to be available. He wanted to be working, I'm not saying he did everything. He did some very strange things. That sort of that Gertrude Stein film he did over in Sweden with Wilfrid Bramble. It's very, very strange. It's I'm not even going to start. Look it up. It's very, very bizarre. But he would do anything for a laugh, almost. And the fact that we have this legacy that sort of transcends entertainment almost. You got Hitchcock. Unfortunately, the theatre's gone. It's been and gone. But you can read about it in his autobiography. But you've got the Wombles, you've got Doctor Who, you've got the Sellers, the films he did with Sellers. You've got so much. To have all that catalogue, that pantheon of wonderful stuff that we can all dip into as whenever we want is absolutely fantastic. Like what we're doing now, having a Bernard Cribbins Day, it's absolutely superb, and that stuff's there in perpetuity, which is tremendous. And again, he would love that. I probably never even considered it, but if you sort of said, "What do you think, Bernard?" He would have yeah, it's good. He'd have loved it.
BBC Radio 4 Extra.